all these different types of music. You've got the best bits from kind of AC/DC rock and roll riffs, rock and roll drumming and guitar playing. You've got the fantastic kind of theatrics of Queen, you know, Aerosmith's kind of rock and roll persona is there too. They've just taken all these really good elements, rolled them into one ball and turned it into a very entertaining package and a very musical package.
I think they have taken their little slice of influences from all manner of different rock to create this new hybrid in 2004. I think it's a little bit of a lot of different things, but when you see him on stage at Nebworth supporting Robbie and he kind of steals the show, or when you see him play Glastonbury, or when you see him play this, that and the other, when I look at him on stage, I do see vast elements of Freddie Mercury. And I remember seeing Freddie when I was very, very young. I think one of the first gigs I ever went to was a kind of Magic at Nebworth. And having lots of those DVDs at home to watch. You know, when you see Freddie, when you see the band of Queen, the band I immediately think of now is The Darkness.
One of the many venues that the band played was the Notting Hill Arts Centre, and a couple of the DJs of that club were running their own label, a very small indie label called Must Destroy. Up until that point, they'd put out, you know, a couple of 7-inches, as far as I know, by a couple of reasonably obscure bands. But eventually, having made contact with Sue Whitehouse, she rang them up apparently one day and said, "Would you like to put a single out?" And you know, this was a fair way into the band's career, and I think it's still amazing that a label never even wanted to put out a single by the band. I think that's utterly ludicrous. But nevertheless, you know, obviously Must Destroy, you know, grabbed that opportunity and put out this single. You know, it was a great debut single. You know, like most bands' debut singles, you know, you get some of their best tracks they've spent years on. So you get, you know, rather than some dodgy B-sides and, you know, remixes or a comedy recording of the drummer snoring on the bus, you know, you had 3 great tracks.
The I Believe in a Thing Called Love EP was an indicator of the musical talent of the band. Yet it failed to secure them a record deal, and by the close of 2002, the unwillingness of labels to sign The Darkness suggested that while people wanted to watch their shows, no one was prepared to take the band further.
Around that time, people didn't quite know what to make of the band. I mean, for years, you know, since pretty much immediately as soon as they started treading the boards at the Barfly, they had a fan base of A&R men who, you know, really loved the band, but either didn't dare go back and tell their bosses that, you know, we should sign these up, or they did go back to their bosses, tell them about The Darkness, and were, you know, roundly laughed out of the office.
I think initially, you know, when you first hear the band, and you hear this thing, this joke sound, this kind of amusing sound, it's difficult to take them seriously as a rock band. The initial impression is just this funny band, funny pub band. Great to go and see with your mates, but you know, maybe you wouldn't want to go buy the record. And it was a slow period. It was, you know, like you say, 3 years before anything really happened. But I think the reason it took such a long time is because, you know, a lot of A&R people and record company people really don't know much about music. You know, I think that's the secret there.
Would you touch them if they walked through your office looking like that and with their hair and the tattoos and the bandanas and all that kind of stuff? I mean, they were a band who, on first inspection, was seriously trapped in another time. It isn't until you hear the music and you actually get what they were doing that you realise that quickly, you know, sign this lot. You're onto an absolute goldmine here.
To be honest, the Darkness's success and their viability as a record-selling juggernaut wasn't exactly obvious at all, and it clearly wasn't obvious to every record company in the country. And I think it was really proven by sheer, you know, the strength of their fan base and the fact they were filling out all these venues. They basically proved it themselves.
In February 2003, The Darkness's second single, Get Your Hands Off My Woman, was released to little fanfare and an indifferent record-buying public. Still gathering momentum live, supporting Def Leppard on a 9-date tour, the band decided to take their unique brand of rock across the Atlantic.
In March 2003, the band went back over to Austin, Texas for their second appearance at the South by Southwest event, which went down a storm apparently. But this time when they came back, they weren't, touring around in a fruitless fashion in a transit van playing for 5 people. They were embarking on their own, UK headline tour, having supported, a few big-name acts like Def Leppard and built up a real profile by that point. At the end of the tour, they played the London Astoria, which is, 2,000 plus capacity, filled it out, and again, it was amazing to note that, this was an unsigned band.
The Astoria is the rock venue in London, I would say. Certainly the biggest mid-size one. Obviously, you can go on to Brixton Academy and onwards and upwards. But for that sort of level, for an unsigned band to sell out the Astoria, 2,000 people, that's a lot of people, especially up against the competition they've got, which I can't remember specifically, but it would have been, Good Charlotte and all the other bands who were around then. For them to go up against that with their kind of image, their kind of music, which was so different to anything else that was coming out at that time, very good indeed. What attracted me to them was that they played here in 2002 as support to a band called the Wild Hearts. And I get a big vibe from how many people ask for a guest list for a show or whatever. And I got more guest lists for the Darkness than I did for the Wild Hearts on that particular show. So I knew they were going somewhere. And when the agent rang me and said they wanted to do a show here, my ears pricked up. And that was about the time they were starting to get loads of press and everything. So I knew they'd do really well. The show in 2002, when they supported the Wild Hearts, flagged it up big time. And it was fairly obvious to me from then on, especially having seen the performance and how they went down at that show, that this was going to work big time.
Both the Def Leppard shows and the sellout Astoria gig proved that the Darkness were no passing phenomenon. And in May 2003, they were signed to East West Records. Yet whether the band were a mocking, ironic joke in the style of Spinal Tap, or whether they could be taken seriously like their various 70s rock idols, became the focus of critical debate in the music press.
If they're a joke, it doesn't matter that they're a joke because it's a very funny joke. It don't matter at all. So I think they're a very entertaining band, and you can't watch them without smiling, without enjoying yourself. I think they're there to make people happy.
They do. I know lots of people have said that they do seem like Spinal Tap, but to me, Spinal Tap were one of the finest rock bands in the world because they didn't take themselves too seriously, nor did the Darkness. And music is just fun, it's a leisure activity, and if the Darkness are a modern-day Spinal Tap, then what's the problem? What's the problem in just having fun and not taking yourself too seriously?
I don't think there would be a Darkness if there wasn't a Spinal Tap. I think it's fairly obvious that they're using some of the more funny elements of that movie as part of their image, as part of the way they perform. And, I'm just waiting for the bass player to get stuck in something, on a live show, because he's a very cheeky-looking bass player. I think it'd be funny if he was stuck inside a giant egg or catacomb or whatever.
I think Justin, has always enjoyed the film Spinal Tap, purely because it's amusing. The Darkness are a traditional rock band, yet they have kind of emerged, post-millennium, and so they are aware of, now 4 decades of rock's conventions and ludicrous things.